Now for today's program. Kati Marton, an award-winning Hungarian-American journalist, is a former NPR and ABC News correspondent and former chairwoman of the Committee to Protect Journalists. She is also a former chairwoman of the International Women's Health Coalition and serves on many boards, including the International Rescue Committee, Human Rights Watch, and the New America Foundation. Kati is board chair of Action for Democracy, a US-based NGO that supports pro-democracy actors and movements worldwide. A New York Times bestselling author, Kati's books include Enemies of the People, My Family's Journey to America, which was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. She is also author of The Great Escape, 9 Jews Who Fled Hitler and Changed the World, as well as Wallenberg, the incredible true story of the man who saved the Jews of Budapest, among many other titles. Kati's latest book is The Chancellor, The Remarkable Odyssey of Angela Merkel. Ira Forman is a senior fellow at the Moment Institute, where he curates Moment's Anti-Semitism Monitor. He is also a visiting professor and senior fellow at Georgetown University Center for Jewish Civilization and serves as senior advisor on anti-Semitism at Human Rights First. Ira is the former U.S. State Department Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. Joining Kati and Ira today is Amy E. Schwartz, Moment's opinion and book editor, as well as editor of the magazine's popular Ask the Rabbi section, and editor of the book, Can Robots Be Jewish? And Other Pressing Questions of Modern Life. Before coming to Moment, Amy was a longtime editorial writer and op-ed columnist on cultural issues at the Washington Post and was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize in commentary. She has also worked at Harper's Magazine, The New Republic, and the Wilson Quarterly, and has lived in and reported from France, Germany, and Turkey. Amy is president of the Non-Denominational Jewish Studies Center in Washington, D.C. Please welcome Kati Marton, Ira Forman, and Amy E. Schwartz.
I'm really happy to talk about this fascinating subject with two people who I know have a lot of fascinating things to say about it. Ira, let's start with you. The Jewish community in Hungary is, significant and has a storied history. You have had extensive interactions, I don't know if that's exactly the right word, with the Hungarian government of Viktor Orban over this question of anti-Semitism, both as a State Department envoy for combating anti-Semitism, and subsequently. So tell us what's going on. Set the scene for us. Are you seeing anti-Semitism from this government? Is the Jewish community suffering from anti-Semitism? And why is it so important for Orban to say there isn't any?
Well, there's a lot of good questions. Yes, certainly. There's first off, the demographics. There are probably over 100,000 Jews in Hungary, one of the largest communities in Europe. One of the largest diaspora communities in general. There is certainly anti-Semitism. You can say that about every country in Europe. I think in terms of attitudinal anti-Semitism, what we can glean from polling, et cetera, it looks roughly the same as a lot of other Eastern European countries, like France like Poland or Romania, et cetera. And as the government likes to say, and it's true, there has been little violence against Jews. Nonetheless, we have data that indicates that Jews worry a lot, even compared to other countries, about anti-Semitism. There's a Frost survey from a few years back. Fundamental Rights Agency of the European Union did a survey of Jews in the European Union, and 2 surveys. The earlier one said that 48% of Hungarian Jews have thought about leaving Hungary because of anti-Semitism. A few years later, it was down to 40%, but that's high for the European Union. And we'll talk about, I think, in detail about the government's role. But this certainly is not a Nazi-like government. But there is anti-Semitism in the government, and the government uses anti-Semitism, and we can talk about that a little bit more in detail.
So to come back to the last part of my very long question, why is the government, why does it approach you constantly saying we have zero tolerance for anti-Semitism? How does that fit in?
It's a great question. Yeah, so it's not just me. They say it to everybody. We have, it's like one of the talking points. when they want to say they clearly care about this, because they say that they put money into lobbyists and PR people that often address this issue. And a lot of times when they talk about it, they immediately try to move it off. Well, we don't have any violence like in Western Europe, like in Belgium or France. So there's all about this whataboutism. What about so-and-so, et cetera. So yeah, I haven't been able to get into Viktor Orban's head. So I don't know exactly what he's thinking, but from their activity, they clearly care. I mean, I don't think they care nearly as much about charges of corruption or which are true, or about undermining democracy by taking over the media, running unfair elections, all these kind of illiberal democracy actions. I don't think they care as much as that, for whatever reason, than they care about anti-Semitism.
So that is a perfect segue to you, Kati. Kati, you were born in Hungary. You escaped from there as a child. You've been involved in activism in recent years against the doings of Orban's government, but also you've known Orban personally for many years. Can you get inside his head for us? Who is he really, and what is he doing?
Yeah, don't send me inside that man's head. That is not a place I want to visit. But let me just say, first of all, let me commend you, Amy, and Suzanne and Moment for setting up this really important and I think fascinating topic. So thank you, and thank you for the honor of being part of it with Ira, whom I admire deeply. Let me just say that in Europe today, it is unacceptable to be overtly anti-Semitic. You can be overtly anti-Muslim, anti-LGBTQ, as Viktor Orban is. He rails against LGBTQ communities loudly and frequently in a way that he would never allow himself or allow anyone in his administration to do about the Jewish community. But the fundamental problem in Hungary is that Hungary has not confronted its own history, and therein lies the crux of why we can't trust the present. Because as the Nobel Committee today so beautifully stated in awarding the Nobel Peace Prize to 3 human rights activists, one from Ukraine, one from Russia, and one from Belarus, that confronting past crimes is essential in preventing future ones. It's that simple. Hungary has not confronted its heinous past the way, for example, Germany has. Hungary still portrays itself, and Orban encourages this, as a victim. I was in Hungary when Orban erected among the most hideous pieces of kitsch art I've ever seen in a central square in Budapest, which portrayed Hungary as a falling angel. The portrait of innocence with a huge kind of Grimm's fairy tale style bird pecking out its eye. That the monster bird representing Germany, the victim, the falling angel, Hungary. Well, this is not a realistic portrayal of what happened in Hungary. And, I am personally familiar with that because my grandparents were good Hungarian citizens of many generations, were taken with a great deal of help from their neighbors to the Auschwitz-bound trains. I've never even seen a photograph of my grandmother and grandfather because nothing remained of their belongings. And a few years ago, I went to find what was left and looked for the synagogue from where they were entrained in the town of Miskolc. And it was a Sunday, and the only place that was open was the pub across the street from where my guidebook indicated this was the synagogue. and the surly woman behind the bar said, "There's no synagogue. There's no synagogue here." And I said, "Well, look, there had to have been." And she shrugged and went back to pouring drinks. And because my husband, Richard Holbrook, who is a very stubborn guy, he said, "Come on, we're gonna find that synagogue." And it turned out that the concrete wall around the former synagogue, which entirely blocked what was left of the synagogue, there was a small door. We got in, and Richard said, "Let me call Leonard Lauder." Leonard Lauder, of course, a great supporter of restoring Hungarian and other synagogues in the region. And Richard got Mr. Lauder on the phone and said, "Yes, indeed, we're restoring the synagogue behind the barrier." And so we got in, and there was a great deal of activity and construction work behind the barrier. But to me, this was a metaphor for here is this American philanthropist trying to revive the past, and the Hungarian community surrounding that effort is indifferent and ignorant, and that is a problem, because how do you prevent another round of murderous violence if the community isn't aware of its capacity for that kind of treacherous violence? So it's, in contrast to Germany, where I've spent much of the last 4 years in writing the biography of Chancellor Merkel, where every kid from age 6 onward is taken to one of the horrible shrines to the Holocaust that dot the former Reich. It's a part of their national identity. Hungary has not done that hard work, and therefore, when Viktor Orban turns George Soros, obviously a Jewish capitalist, the perfect demon for Orban, into a symbol of everything that's wrong with the West, everybody gets what he's saying. It's the Jews who are to blame for every damn thing. So it needs to happen, that confronting of the role that Hungary played in sending good Hungarians, their fellow citizens, to their death.
So I have heard you describe Orban as sort of a pure opportunist, and
Yes.
to say that, in contrast to this general cultural problem, which he's, part of, that, you're not sure, you don't really think he's an anti-Semite at all. And so we can talk a little bit about what that means.
I don't think Orban is anything. He has no convictions other than self-preservation. He obviously he started when I first met him, 1989. He was a progressive, skinny young guy who wanted to kick the Russians out. Now he's embracing Moscow and Beijing and the Saudis, and that club of gangsters. They all recognize each other and congregate together, and that is a different Viktor Orban than the one that held such promise. And the fact is that after he lost an election, he vowed that he would never again risk losing an election, and identified, and this goes back to sorry for my long-winded answer to your first question, but it goes back to that first answer, is that he because Hungarians are not really aware of the past and have bolted that door shut. He was able to ride to electoral success by playing to that unworked on past, and that we Hungarians are everybody's, that we're victims, and that only I, Viktor Orban, can protect you from all the enemies that surround us. And Milosevic did the same thing, and Putin is doing the same thing. But there is some comfort in the fact that he is a man without convictions.
So you knew him, right? You can take us back. You knew him. You knew him when he was sort of a normal person.
Yes, I mean, he was obviously very bright. He was en route to Oxford University on a Soros scholarship. How's that for irony? He asked me to organize a dinner party in our home to meet quote unquote important friends, among them George Soros, by the way. And he spoke good English. He was perfectly charming and very open to their ideas, and not a whiff of this wild notion of illiberal illiberal liberalism that he's since floated, whatever that means. And then slowly he turned into power. We all know corrupts, and he's gained a lot of power. There are virtually no dissenting voices allowed in Hungary. Roughly 90% of the media is Orban controlled. The judiciary has been fixed to be Orban friendly, and he is now a man in trouble. And again, in that there's a promise for all of us, in trouble because of the war in Ukraine, which is right next door to him, and because it is no longer acceptable for a member of the EU, a member of NATO, Hungary is both, to be anti this war, and that is to say anti-Ukraine, as he was at the outset, and to be that cozy with Moscow. And the EU is finally doing the right thing by Orban and Hungary, and withholding billions in funding for Hungary, desperately needed by Hungary, with the proviso that he has to clean up the judiciary, clean up the corruption. It's a mafia state, basically. I mean, it's Orban and his buddies, the equivalent of the Russian oligarchs, who have gotten very wealthy off the land, and now they're under tremendous pressure to clean up their act, and in that, before they get the EU funding. So this is a tragic war in Ukraine. I don't mean to put a different gloss on that, but the fact is that this war is very bad news for a guy who is basically a man of no conviction and a culture warrior. That is to say, he doesn't want to be dealing with a war. He wants to be dealing with, I will protect the nation against the Muslim hordes and the LGBTQ, the decadent West. We're not talking about that anymore. We're talking
about the war. I want to come back to that. I want to come back to that and to Ukraine. But let me just take a parenthesis, since you. If the people, you all will forgive me, just a slightly philosophical question about what this means. I mean, you say he doesn't really believe in anything. He's not an anti-Semite per se. Ira, I remember you had a view about what that means. Like, when is it anti-Semitism? Does it matter what he believes, or is there another level to this? Then we'll come back to the broader picture.
When I started really delving into anti-Semitism in a more serious way, it's when I went to the State Department in 2013. And at that time, I believed that, and my gut reaction is, someone's not an anti-Semite unless they really hate Jews. Like in their inner, mind or heart, they don't have to necessarily say it, but if they, think it, I don't like Jews, etc., that makes them an anti-Semite. And I think that's only part of the story. I think you can be an anti-Semite and do anti-Semitic things, even if you don't hate Jews at all. I mean, if it's politically expedient and you're using anti-Semitism, that is going to damage people. It's going to damage Jews in your country. It's going to damage other people, frankly, down the road, other than Jews. but it's your actions and your words are as important as your feelings. So I do think you can be an anti-Semite without hating Jews. That's sad, but I think that my experience, I would say that.
Interesting. So let's go back to I just wanted to I thought that was an interesting point to bring out, but let's go back to what Kati was talking about and talk about how the war in Ukraine has kind of reshuffled the deck for a lot of nations, and Hungary is no exception. What do you see ahead for him and his model of illiberal democracy, or ethnic nationalism, whatever you call it? I would like to hear from both of you on that, and then we'll.
Well, we're already, Amy, we're already seeing it. I mean, he is now scrambling to appoint a body to monitor corruption. The corruption which he, of course, has instilled in the Hungarian culture. So it's kind of, asking the fox to guard the hen house. Is that the metaphor? And whether it's more, whether more meaningful reforms will be forthcoming is questionable. One of his defense mechanisms is that the Hungarian language is a code spoken by a very small population, and he literally speaks out of both sides of his mouth. So he speaks in a more conciliatory language to Brussels, that is to say, the European Union, and a much more inflammatory language to his base. So, but I think now, having lost his enabler as anti-democrat in the EU, that is to say Poland, because Poland and Hungary always looked after each other in the EU, and since unanimity is required for most things to get done, they stymied progress. But now Poland has behaved really well in vis-a-vis refugees, and very strong in its anti-Moscow, anti-Putin position. And so Orban is really isolated now in Europe, and therefore he has to, at least so far it's cosmetic, the changes he's made, but he's under tremendous pressure. And I just pray that both the Biden administration and the European Union maintain the pressure, because I know Hungary is a small landlocked country of not great consequence, but the fact is that Hungary punches above its weight symbolically, because it has been embraced by the American far right, as this Orban is the poster child for the model autocrat, and helped by Tucker Carlson, who seems to love Orban and has taken his show there a couple of times, and even Trump, who hails him as a perfect role model for himself. So it's really important that Washington and the European Union make it crystal clear to Orban that his this phony illiberal liberalism that he touts is not going to wash. That you can't Chancellor Merkel asked him to define what is illiberal liberalism, and he kind of shrugged. So I mean, it's not a thing. It's the opposite of. And to return to our theme, which is of course the crucially important subject of Jewish life in Hungary. Jewish life does not thrive in an intolerant, illiberal society, which Hungary has become. So it may not be overtly anti-Semitic. I don't believe that it is, because it is unacceptable in today's Europe to be overtly anti-Semitic. But projecting into the future, this kind of intolerance, and saying that Hungary is only for Hungarians, and that we do not mix races. I mean, he said that in a speech a few weeks ago. That was straight out of Joseph Goebbels. No racial mixing in Hungary, which is total BS, because there's no such thing as a pure Hungarian. You know, you just look at the map and you see that everybody passed through there. You know, Hungary's iconic poet, Petőfi, was the child of Slovakian parents, so and so on.
Is he talking about, I mean, ostensibly, is he talking about Muslims and tapping Islamophobia when he says things like that?
Absolutely. Yeah. But he's also saying, he's pointing at the West, you know, right. Look at Paris, look at London. Those are no longer French or English cities. We in Budapest, we are still pure thoroughbred Hungarians, and you know that cannot stand in 2022. I mean, the world has moved on, but he's managed to confine his population. It's remarkable. Behind this wall of you know, this mythology that he spun about how we're everybody's. Why does everybody hate us? Well, everybody doesn't. It's his behavior that the rest of the Western democracies condemn. It isn't Hungarians. I don't feel like I've been targeted for being of Hungarian background. On the contrary.
Ira, this is something you've been following also. Talk about the way that the Jewish community in Hungary has been dealing with or not dealing with this government. What do you see? Do you see this kind of illiberal democracy, ethnic nationalism affecting the community?
Well, first, let me just say, I agree with Kati of much of what she said, essentially all of it. Orban's really important in this region of the world, because in terms of anti-Semitism, I firmly believe that people look to it. If he can get away with playing this game of anti-Semitism for political purposes, then what's to stop other Eastern European countries who have often not also confronted the historical realities of what really happened? Of course, Nazi Germany was the main reason that 6 million Jews lost their lives. But the role of occupied countries is really significant, and not dealing with it, exactly what Kati said. You relive history if you don't understand it at all. So I think that's really important. In terms of the Jewish community, you know, like most European Jewish communities, they came out of not just the tragedy of the Holocaust, with Hungary losing about 75% of its Jewish population, which is much better than almost any place in Eastern Europe, except maybe Bulgaria and Albania. They still had a significant population, but then the suppression of religion under the Soviet Union, these are communities that have been, over the last 30 years, trying to build themselves back. So, you know, historically, most of the Jewish community was associated with what was called the Neolog movement, still called the Neolog, which is somewhat similar to our conservative Judaism. And from what we have in terms of data of how people register with the government, in terms of what Jewish community they associate with, the Neolog community is about 80%, or what's called Majahis, which not exactly the Neolog community, is about 80% of the Jewish population. And the Orthodox community is something like a little less than 20. And then there are 2 Reform congregations. But both mainly, unfortunately, most of the communities identified with the opposition. I mean, certainly the Jewish organizations don't take a political point of view or don't endorse candidates, but they generally have what would be called a liberal outfit. And they're mainly urban voters, like other urban voters in Hungary, who are more attracted to the opposition. Now, parts of the Orthodox community, in particular, it's concerning to me that Orban's played this game, which autocrats often play, which is if you have a minority that you want to undermine, especially if it's, identify with your opponent, you find somebody in the community that can basically be your shill. And Orban, what Orban has done is taken one of the Orthodox congregation called EMIH, but taken that and he shovels assets to them. This is not unusual. He takes assets, whether it's property or money directly, and gives them to his favorite buddies and starves the other organizations. And this is what's happening to Majlis with the Neolog population, the majority of it, and undermining their organizations. And it's not just money. A few years back, as this tension was Orban kept ginning it up. There was a cover of a very prominent magazine in Hungary, which showed the head of the Neolog Majlis community. On the cover, there were bills, cash, forints, flowing down around his head. So this is a classic anti-Semitic meme. Basically, the story said we believe he's embezzling money. Well, no one's ever followed that up with any evidence or whatever. And in fact, Jewish organizations around the world condemned it, as well as the Jewish community, as kind of dog whistle anti-Semitism. You don't say the word Jew, but everybody knows what you're talking about. And Orban's response was fascinating, very typical, I find, of Orban. He was asked to condemn the magazine cover. Now, one of his very close associates ran the magazine at that point and eventually just gave it over to the government, but it just mouthed the government's lines. So it was disingenuous to say we had nothing to do with it. But let's play the game that, assuming he would say, well, it's not our magazine. He then said, oh, this would be censorship if I criticize him. This is ridiculous. He knows it's ridiculous. It's not censorship. We do this all the time. You're not shutting them down. You're not taking away their free speech. All you're saying is the government is abhorred. If you have zero tolerance for anti-Semitism, you call this stuff out. You don't shut it down. You don't punish it. There's no judicial or legal thing, but it is important for government leaders to shut it down. But Orban says these types of things all the time. Oh, I can't do this because of such and such and such. And when the pressure is on, he'll turn around. He'll do exactly what he said he can't do. And I've seen it time and time again.
So let's talk about that for a minute. I want to get to the effect Orban's having on the American political scene, but let's finish with that, because you've just mentioned something very interesting, which is you're suggesting that Orban actually responds to pressure, that this is actually something that activism or sort of well-targeted criticism he actually sometimes can be affected by it. I think both of you can speak to that.
Go ahead, Ira.
I've seen it personally in a number of things. My perspective was kind of built from being a U.S. diplomat, and the United States has bilateral relations with all these countries around the world. We like to keep everything being equal. We like to keep friendly relations. But when the United States says something, countries like Hungary, who are part of NATO, as we said, and the EU, pay attention. So an example, there's a very good Holocaust museum. It's called the Pava Street Holocaust Museum that actually Orban's government in the 1990s proposed and began building. And what the nice thing about that museum is it really does tell the real story. It talks about anti-Semitism in Hungary before the war, the growth of anti-Semitism. It talks about Hungarian participation in the Holocaust, as well as obviously the main faults are the Reich, etc. And when I came into the government in 2013, Pava Street had been neglected. And there was actually the government, Orban's government, had allowed the board to fall apart. There was no board left. So because they didn't want, I can only assume, they didn't want this message to come out, they began starving it. They wouldn't pay rent, or they wouldn't pay utilities, and they wouldn't pay salaries. And this was kind of underground, but some people started complaining and scholars were leaving, etc. And we thought they were trying to end the museum, especially since they were going to build their own museum of the Holocaust, which was going to be built by a Holocaust distorter, Maria Schmidt, who's a close buddy of Orban. And many of the democratic governments, led by the United States, came to Budapest, and we basically did a press conference with we visited the museum, did a press conference with all the ambassadors from places like UK and France and the United States, et cetera. Our embassy did a magnificent job with this. And we said, we can't stop you if you want to shut this museum down because you're not paying utilities, you're not paying salaries. We can't stop you. But we will come back every year, even if this is only a hole in the ground. We will come back every year and say to you, why did you shut the Holocaust Museum down? And lo and behold, after months and months of saying, well, we can't do anything about it. It's already paid. We don't have a board, so we can't do anything. Suddenly, bang, they started paying the utilities and et cetera.
It's
a similar thing is we had a 6 months battle with him in 2015, in which they were going to put a statuette to a 1930s and 40s minister in the Hungarian government who co-authored the bills to strip Jews of their citizenship. And then in the 40s, argued for the deportation of Jews, which actually happened eventually in 44. And as we talked about, 7 weeks, 435,000 plus Jews were sent to Auschwitz by Hungarian bureaucrats and gendarmerie. People didn't even see a SS guard till they passed into the Polish border. And they said for 6 months, oh no, we can't do anything about it because it's the past government, which is an Orban government, already authorized the money. We can't do anything. And there was this huge seminar we did in Budapest with our allies, with the Jewish community, with various folks. We said, this is a joke. This is you are building now, you're honoring someone who was one of the leading anti-Semites, and you say you have zero tolerance? And the next day, that evening, actually, in Parliament, Orban said, we can't build this because the guy had collaborated with the Nazis. We can't, of course, do that.
Interesting. Kati, you sounds like you had something on that.
Yes, because I think we've more than established the fact that Orban speaks out of more than both sides of his mouth. He will do whatever is necessary to placate and to calm his critics. A man of no particular ideological standing or conviction, which enables him to shift position on a dime. So let's not expect him to act any differently than that. But I think I don't want to give a lesson in Hungarian history, but I think we need to take a minute to explain how Hungary got to this place and how it is that this country, which had one of the most flourishing liberal capitals in Europe, the subject of my book, The Great Escape, had produced more Nobel Prize winners than any other country per capita, turned into this illiberal bastion. And that is that Hungary was, let's not forget, part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, reduced to a stump by the Versailles powers, and stripped of 2/3 of its territory,
after
which
World
meant
War I.
that World War I, yes, which meant that the previously tolerated Jews of mostly of Budapest, as one Hungarian wag said, was a city built by the Jews for the rest of us, and it's true. The Jews really were the professional class. I mean, my grandparents benefited from that time. Suddenly, people from all the so-called lost territories, which had been parceled out by Woodrow Wilson and Lloyd George and Clemenceau, and there was parceled out to Romania and Yugoslavia and Slovakia, the successor states. Suddenly, all those Hungarians flooded into the capital and discovered that all the good jobs were taken and they were filled by Jews. And this began this poisonous anti-Semitism, and Hungary beat Germany in passing anti-Semitic laws in 1920, the infamous numerus clausus, which limited to 5% Jewish enrollment in Hungarian universities, which corresponded to the Jewish population. But at that point, something like 60% of universities were it was an out of proportion presence. My mother and father each had PhDs because they got in before the numerus clausus. But that's when the great exodus of the Hungarian intelligentsia, Jewish intelligentsia, began. And since then, Hungary has been living off this rage for a restoration of the lost territories, which Orban feeds. There are Hungarian there are many Hungarian cars. You'll see them in the road with bumper stickers saying Trianon, with a map of the great Hungary of their grandparents' time. I mean, it's a complete.
Really, even now, that's amazing.
Yeah. Trianon is
what year? It's pre.
It's insane. It's insane. But you have to understand, this is the fantasy world that enables Orban, that Orban fuels and enables him, promising that we will be great again. And by the way, you see the same thing happening with Putin and Russia, the promise of restoration, and even Erdogan in Turkey. And it's a very dangerous phenomenon. But I keep repeating, Hungary is a member of the European Union and wants to stay in the European Union. Over 70% of Hungarians are pro-EU, and the European Union has really been taken for a ride by Orban, and that has to stop. And that is, you asked about, does he respond to pressure? Well, he may not respond to people asking him not to put up a statue, but he would respond to a cutoff of funding from the European Union, which is now what is happening. So we have to. This is really a useful. Amy, I again applaud you for having this, because it's
in all fairness, I have to say, I think it was Ira's idea to do this.
Ira,
it's everyone. It's of interest to everyone. It really is. As you say, they
it's an opportune time to highlight this, to bring it to the attention of the Biden administration, the EU, that Hungary is now, Orban is vulnerable, and this is the time to exact a price for the EU's bounty and for Washington's good graces, which of course they want. They're very pro-American fundamentally.
Well, as a segue,
Amy, let me just throw in one other anecdote. When you talk about Orban is willing to back down, in both those cases where we were pushing pressure, we were doing it not because a statue or something was so important, but it was because it was a message to the rest of Eastern Europe that you can't get away with this. Or if you do, we actually didn't think we'd be successful, particularly in the second one. But if you do, there's a price to pay. And the other thing that I think policymakers have to understand, I saw, when we tried to do both of them, I got Hungarian diplomats saying to me, whoa, don't do this. You don't want to get Orban mad. When he gets put in a corner, he pushes back. He's just going to do something worse. And they said that time and time again, and we luckily ignored them. And ultimately, he didn't push back. He got pushed back. And
it's so interesting. I wonder if that's the case with other people that we're talking about that way, like Putin. Maybe it's not true that they're.
Well, Putin has nuclear weapons. Orban does not. So let's start with that.
So to go to take up one more. Sorry, Ira, did I interrupt you?
No, I'm done.
So I just want to take up one other thing. We're almost not quite out of time, but we'll take up all our time, I think. So unfortunately, it turns out Orban's not only of interest to the EU or Europe or his own people. There's a segment of the American hard right that's completely enamored of him and sees his model as the future. Ira, you've been watching that, right? What's up with that? What's up with with CPAC? And liberal democracy.
given my background, I'm not much of an expert on the conservative movement in the United States. It has shocked me because when I was, again, in the second Obama administration, you saw a little bit of that. You saw the Hungarians focusing their lobbying, et cetera, on a couple of Republican members, but it wasn't that extensive. Most Republican members I talked with, even if they were sympathetic to the kind of right-wing ideology, when Orban would do something outrageous on anti-Semitism, they would push back on Orban. But the strong Trump and Tucker Carlson and all these other folks at CPAC, to me is almost inexplicable. But I think it is clearly not unrelated to the extremism in politics that we see. I will say, to be fair, there are a number of conservatives that I know who have pushed back against Orban and the illiberal democracy and the anti-Semitism, not just 4 or 5 years ago, but up to today. And I love, one of the quotes I love the best is from the National Review during the parliamentary elections in 2018. The Prime Minister Orban did this really outrageous speech at the end of the campaign, in which he basically did a litany, never mentioned Soros, or didn't in this litany, of what our enemies are like. And it was Michael Brendan Doherty said, look, I've been a supporter of Orban. I think this criticism of him being illiberal and anti-democratic is way overblown. But what he said here, and he's a smart man, he knows what he's doing. What he said here is a checklist of the charges in the protocols of the elders of Zion. And this is, there are conservatives who understand that and understand that if some of the cultural messages are the same as they would like to hear, there is also some real danger here. And I've always been impressed by that analysis, that he understood that he was on very dangerous territory.
Yes, well, he may have understood, but there are plenty of others who have not, and who have no clue about history, and don't understand that how quickly words turn into deeds in that part of the world, and that inciting one community against the next, we saw that in the Balkans, and that too was Europe, the heart of Europe inflamed. And we just can't accept this kind of illiberalism in 2022. But again, I repeat, this is every one of us has a role to play here, because we each have our own network, and we have to insist that Hungary confront its own history, and it hasn't done that. When I write a piece, for the New York Times or wherever, or a book in which I talk about what happened to my grandparents in Miskolc, and how the town of Miskolc has no memory of sending a third of its population to Auschwitz. I get pushback from Hungarians saying, well, yeah, but everybody suffered, and of course, yes, but no community was singled out for murder. The way the Jews of Hungary were, and they were the most patriotic Hungarians, ridiculously so. I mean, my father would insist that Shakespeare is superior in Hungarian.
I love that. That was hilarious.
I mean, insanely patriotic, which is where Zionism never took hold in Hungary, even though Theodor Herzl was from Budapest, but the Hungarian Jews thought they had already found their Zion on the Danube. They didn't need to go to Palestine.
Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? I mean, in a way.
When I discovered at age 30 that, because I was raised as a Roman Catholic, and I was 30 when I discovered that the story of my grandparents, perishing in Auschwitz. It was just by chance that I made that discovery. I was interviewing somebody saved by Wallenberg for my first book, who mentioned casually, unfortunately, Wallenberg arrived too late for your grandparents. And I didn't want to embarrass my parents by saying, what? Because I'd been told they died under the Allied bombs. I had no reason to question that. My parents shut down. I mean, just the way other Hungarians shut down about the past. They didn't want to go there. They didn't want to talk about it. I had to do my own independent research. I had to go to Miskolc, the town from which they were expelled, because my parents were so traumatized. Because, I mean, my father's reaction when I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" "Kati, you will never understand what we went through. We were Hungarians." And,
Wow.
there was no, eventually we came to terms, but a real generational gap between the generation that lived through the Holocaust and the successor generation that wants, speaking for myself, that wants to be in full possession of the truth.
Wow,
my
that's
parents
amazing.
did not.
That's a remarkable story. Yeah.
Following up on something that Kati said about violence, we also mentioned earlier that the regime, as well as its enablers, constantly say we don't have violence against Jews here, and it's absolutely true. But when the government is doing this, as opposed to, go back to France or Germany where there is violence, the government is trying to do everything it can to protect the community, not just because they love the Jewish community, I think they do generally, but because they understand it's a threat to their very democracies. In Hungary, when you do this, eventually, and if you follow the history of anti-Semitism, pre-World War II, but going way back centuries, when the government gets involved, when kings began to criticize the Jews for various offenses, you cannot count that down the road, violence won't happen. And it is the setup of violence. And that's why government is so darn important. And that's why Hungary and its dealing with anti-Semitism is so bad.
Agree.
That's a lot of, wow, a lot of food for thought there. In particularly, I'm just thinking, like the American Christian right is so insistently Zionist and, claims such a philo-Semitism, but to the question of whether you can separate that from racialist thinking, sort of ethnic nationalism thinking in other realms is a very interesting and troubling one. Look, I think we might have a few questions for our last 6 minutes. Before I want to thank you so much for this depth of expertise and these really heartrending stories. Kati, I never cease to be amazed by the stories from your life, and Ira, all this important work you've done.
Little too much drama in my life. What can you do?
Wouldn't we'd all rather have undramatic lives, right? With no fabulous anecdotes.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you.
Thank you both. And Ira, thanks for inspiring this conversation. And let's see if Suzanne has any questions for us from the hustings.
Sure, thank you. And I want to echo the thanks for this really important, informative conversation. One person wanted to know if there are any Jews in the Orban government.
That's a good question. There's certainly this woman who resigned recently after Orban's speech, which was considered anti-Semitic and racist at the end of this campaign.
This is the speech you were referring to before about
that Kati was referring to, was Jewish, and I don't know if she formally was in the government, but she was a close ally of Orban. It's also strange. The woman who was going to develop their new Holocaust Museum, the House of Fates, which I call her a Holocaust distortionist, and that's not my words. It's the finest scholar of Hungarian Holocaust talked to her about that. She is not Jewish herself, but her husband was Jewish. And she is like the de facto house historian for the Orban regime.
What is the relation?
But I don't know. I'm sure there's some Jews but I don't know. As I said, this congregation, that smaller Orthodox congregation that basically supports Orban. They're not in the government, but they are enablers.
Huh.
What is the relationship, if any, between Orban's government and the Israeli government?
I'll let Ira.
Excellent question. I mean, that's another thing that they say all the time. Well, we support Israel. We vote with them in the United Nations. We're very supportive. And there was a close relationship between Netanyahu and the Orban government. This prime minister, Lapid, who is of Hungarian background, whose father barely survived. There's a horrendous story about almost being shot into the Danube. And he and his mother were, because it was an air raid and everybody scattered, they went to a public toilet and they were saved. But Lapid, even though I think he's grateful at times for Hungary's vote in places like the UN, he has been very critical of some of the kind of anti-Semitic antics that Orban and some of his acolytes have been engaged in.
I found it shameful that Netanyahu, who had a close relationship with Orban, never criticized Orban's attacks on George Soros.
I remember, wasn't there an incident where the Israeli ambassador actually in Budapest actually said something critical about this anti-Soros campaign, and then the Israeli government shut them down?
Exactly. Yeah. That's actually what I was thinking about. That was really shameful.
It was interesting to me because in 2015, when we were doing these campaigns against these memorials to Nazis, the Israeli embassy was very helpful and was open about this. But then a few years later, when this situation happened with Soros, the ambassador actually had criticized the attacks on Soros and then had to take it back.
Right. Yeah. No, there was a special bond between Orban and Netanyahu, which was incomprehensible to me. But anyway, Lapid is a whole new day.
Kati, you mentioned in your opening remarks that Orban studied on a Soros scholarship.
Right.
How does he explain that today?
He doesn't. That has been airbrushed out of history. But Soros paid for him to study at Oxford University, and I mean, it's really a deplorable lack of gratitude that he's made his former mentor into his demon of choice just to get reelected. I mean, Orban put posters, or Orban supporters put posters of George Soros in really a caricature form, not subtle at all in turning Soros into the Jewish meme. And never looked back. And I don't think George Soros has anything to do with Hungary anymore. And of course, Orban evicted Central European University from Budapest. It was one of Europe's great universities, founded by George Soros. I was privileged to serve as a trustee for many years, and it was forced out of Budapest, and now has relocated to Vienna. I mean, that's the gratitude that Orban has shown.
How will the recent election in Italy have an impact, if any, on Orban and his government?
I think we know very little about Meloni. I think the world is holding its breath because she's now being extremely tempered in her remarks, very conciliatory. But of course, in her history, there are disturbing resonances to Mussolini and the fascist movement. So it's hard to say at this point which Meloni will materialize, but it certainly isn't good news for democracy, and might be good news for Orban. So watch this space for more.
Ira, are you watching this for the Anti-Semitism Monitor?
the anti-Semitism monitor, as you probably know, Amy, is fairly narrow in the sense that we're looking for incidents. And so you have to have somebody do something or say something before you get the privilege of being an anti-Semitic.
Okay.
And we're not there yet, but yeah, I think about this all the time. I mean, Kati, you and I and Amy talked about this a little yesterday. It's obvious to all of us that, you know, Jewish communities are going to fare better long-term in democracies than they are in autocracies. Or,
Of course.
In terms of
Very important.
totalitarian dictatorships, even if there is a time when Jewish community is treated well, which, you know, we look at Russia for a while, Jewish community's been treated well. Now that there's a crisis, you see in Russian media, lots of anti-Semitic comments, and whether Putin is trying to stop it or maybe even encourage it, we don't know, but there are no institutions to save minority communities when you go authoritarian. And so I think we have to, obviously, Amy, be very concerned about these types of things.
Yeah, and let's not wait for an incident. Let's you know, see, these things don't happen overnight. There are many steps that precede violence.
So as we've come to a close and we wrap up, for those who are watching, aside from watching this and being aware, what can people do with regard to this situation?
Tune in, be aware. You know, politics is global now. What happens in Topeka resonates in Budapest, and vice versa. It's a globalized world, and ignorance is no excuse. And to be a citizen, it isn't enough to vote every 4 years. You've got to stay informed, and also, you know, beware of your news sources. That's a huge problem. Social media, the spreader of more disinformation than Goebbels ever dreamed of. So, you know, each of us has a responsibility, I think, and not only to stay informed, but to use our voices in whatever platform we have. We're living through a hinge moment, to coin a cliche, and we can't sleepwalk through it, because the signs are everywhere, starting in our homeland. And, you know, just I'm sure you've all watched or have plans to watch the Holocaust series, Ken Burns' Holocaust series on PBS. I urge you to do so. And for me, one of the startling revelations was that Hitler was inspired by Jim Crow laws in crafting the Nuremberg laws. So, you know, I was not aware of that.
Ira?
Yeah, I just would say that, you know, though the Jewish community here is largely thought of as a Democratic constituency, there's a significant Republican minority, and a lot of folks in the community, both left and right, are involved in politics. So it's important for Republicans to talk to their colleagues about this and say that this is a great concern, and that we should not be congratulating or emulating Orban. This is not what we want to do. And this is a larger issue with anti-Semitism. You know, anti-Semitism comes not just from the right, it comes from the leftists too. And so those of us who are progressives or Democrats, our job is also to take on the anti-Semitism on the left.
Of course.
I think citizen activism is great. And the one hopeful thing I will say about that is, you know, I've read in recent years about the Soviet Jewry movement, which was probably the most successful human rights campaign of the 20th century. When it started in the 60s, no one thought that you could bring a superpower to open up its borders, certainly not the Soviet Union. And it wasn't Jewish organizations per se, it wasn't politicians, it was citizen activists who educated themselves about what was really happening and students eventually within the first year or two, college students who started these movements and brought in Jewish organizations and brought in politicians. So grassroots stuff is very important, but you got to know what's going on. As to what Kati said about the internet and social media, you have to get good information first. Educate yourself, and this type of activism is still possible.
Great. Thank you. I want to thank Ira, Kati, Amy again for this wonderful conversation. I will be sending out a follow-up email that will have a link to the recording, so please share it. We'll also send out some links to the various organizations that Ira and Kati work with. Please remember to go to momentmag.com where you can sign up for next week's program, which is about Jewish refugee professors that found jobs at historically Black colleges and universities during the Holocaust and after. Again, thank you everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.
And thank you, Amy. Thank you, Ira.
Bye-bye.